This is Small Business Conversations with Akona Machoba, unlocking essential advice, opinions, and key issues that affect South Africa's small business community.
Thank you for joining us for yet another edition of the Small Business Conversations podcast, Moneyweb's weekly SME show highlighting critical issues affecting South Africa's small business environment. In this episode, we take an exciting look at the fast-growing medical cannabis industry, specifically the medicinal use industry. The cannabis industry has attracted significant attention in the last couple of years, South Africa being just one country expressing interest to participate in the space as the once legally frowned upon plant develops into a fast-growing industry that promises economic growth and job creation for many developing nations on the continent. Lesotho has been on the forefront of exploring this industry's gains, being one of the first African countries to offer legal licenses to grow the plant. However, many other countries, even though they want to tap into this market, are taking much longer to get the ball rolling. Luc van der Nest, the head of business at MG Health, a company based in Lesotho and operating in the medical cannabis industry, joins me now to share some insight on how the state of cannabis is looking for the continent and the region, the Southern African region. Thank you for joining us on the pod, Luke.
Thanks for having me, Akona.
So, starting at the beginning to lay the ground for our conversation, can you just quickly describe the state of play for the medical cannabis industry on the continent currently? Where are we succeeding and where are we failing?
Sure. It's a bit of a patchwork of regulations, and it's obviously something that's developing in some cases quite quickly and in some places very, very slowly. Lesotho was the sort of first to start the race when they started issuing licenses for medical cannabis production in 2017. And then followed quite quickly afterwards by South Africa. What we've seen really as the biggest issue, I think, that's maybe stymieing the space is that the initial view was that cannabis supposedly unlocked this massive economic potential, economic opportunity, and the way to go about it was to issue production licenses and export licenses to enable companies to start producing and access global markets. But at the same time, there was no real progress made on building local regulation frameworks to create markets within the country and also just create efficient pathways for prescribing medicinal cannabis, as it is in places like Germany and Israel. So there's been a lot of progress made, at least on a production basis, and there's a lot of companies and firms that have made really great strides on producing world-class, high-quality products. But at the same time, it's become very difficult for companies to enter the space, particularly without a lot of capital, because to be able to export into the world, genuine markets, such as Germany or Israel, you're required to comply with very, very strict pharmaceutical standards, and that requires quite a sizable investments generally. And there's no room for companies to sort of get going and build a company in the local market before looking outwards for export. It's unfortunately export only, at least for the moment.
Can you speak to me just about the potential for the sector to contribute to economies? Just on what has been done in the industry so far, it has led many to believe that the industry could contribute several billions to economies, specifically the South African economy, with just medicinal cannabis alone. Where is the value coming from, and what is the best way to extract it then for especially new entrants in the market?
I do think there is massive potential, and I think it's largely untapped potential. I think if we look at the space, it's been a really big 5 years for the industry globally, coming off the back of Canada legalizing the cannabis in general in 2017. That there's been big strides made, but I think we really are still just scratching the surface. And it's an interesting one because you're dealing with an industry here where demand and use has been established. This is a product that people use all over the world at massive scale, and a lot of those people are self-medicating and they're using it to manage symptoms and certain indications, but they're still accessing it out of grey and unregulated and black markets. So the big challenge has been converting people from the black market into the regulatory channels, and it's obviously been a big goal of commercial players in the space, but something that's been very difficult by the way that regulations are structured. So I think there's massive opportunity across the value chain to answer your question, South Africa and Lesotho, by extension, are countries that are known for really, we've got a strong base of skills in the agricultural sector. We've proven that we compete on a global level in agriculture, and we also compete on a global level in pharmaceuticals. And from a medical perspective or medical cannabis perspective, those are the two most crucial industries that you've got to be able to get right to build production hubs and really globally competitive production companies. But then as you move forward along with legalization and allowing access to the plant, you make room for, what's often called the picks and shovels, in a service to the industry, whether it's platforms that enable more efficient production or front-end platforms that enable better payment processing that are specific to cannabis and medical cannabis. It makes room for more FMCG type products once you get into more of an adult use space. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a massive industry that already exists, but it's in an illegal or unregulated fashion. And the key to unlocking that is putting regulations in place, at least I believe, that facilitate better access and move people over into the regulated industry where they know what type of product they're getting, where it comes from, and that it's clean and safe and consistent.
Speaking about just that regulation aspect then, how would you say this industry is accommodative of new entrants? Here at home, just in South Africa alone, we've seen issues with small-scale farmers struggling to obtain licenses that will support their entrance into the commercial space. How difficult is it for new entrants to make it into this kind of environment? And what has Lesotho done? Because Lesotho has already began issuing out licenses to assist with that process. What can South Africa learn from Lesotho to be better and to get onto that same wavelength in terms of productivity?
So I think, look, the licensing process and the ease of getting a license, enabling smaller scale companies or people to compete it's a crucial piece of this industry because this is an industry that's been sustained by people that have been doing it at a small scale in the informal sector, and to ignore them in the legal commercialization it's not right. But I think the biggest problem to creating a meaningful industry and allowing new entrants or smaller new entrants to get in and build businesses goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of creating a local market. Because the problem faced up until now is that the route to commercialization is not defined by the South African regulators, it's defined by the regulators within the countries where the product needs to be sold. I'll use Germany as an example because it's the biggest medical cannabis market in the world, at least from an international trade perspective, and it is really the gold standard for commercializing an international cannabis business at the moment. The Germans require you to comply with very, very strict pharmaceutical standards before you can export your product into Germany and into pharmacies. Something that's called EU GMP, which stands for European Union Good Manufacturing Practices. And it's very expensive and it's very hard to comply with this in terms of the infrastructure you've got to build, but also the pharmaceutical skills you've got to bring in to get to gear a facility up and gear a company up to face an audit from German regulators to then pass you and be able to get into the market. So without having a local market with regulations and access to the market that are more representative of smaller scale producers getting into it, obviously whilst maintaining safety and a safe supply chain and sufficient testing to know that you're dealing with quality product that's safe for medical patients. Without that, you can't really control it. You can't help with the access because you leave the decisions of commercialization to foreign countries. And they've got no incentive to accelerate the access of smaller scale producers. So I think it really comes back to crafting local regulations with that in mind, that is inclusive and enables people to access the markets or access the industry without having to outlay massive amounts of capital.
You've mentioned capital quite a few times and the costs related to entering the space and being or thriving in the space. Are funders coming on board to assist in this industry, or is there still some level of hesitation? And if so, where are the hesitations lying currently?
So cannabis has gone through a very interesting life cycle in the last 5 years. I think you can actually map it against general graph they put on emerging industries. And there was a period in around 2017, 2018, where there was massive amounts of capital flowing into the market and flowing all over the world just after Canada legalized cannabis completely. And what you had then was companies in Canada that were listed companies that had been focused on medical cannabis in Canada, believing that now this was about to unlock a global opportunity, and full-scale legalization all over the world was a matter of months away. So they raised massive amounts of capital on the listed markets and then went around the world trying to secure global supply chains. So we saw big inflows into Lesotho. There were big flows into South Africa, into Europe. There were facilities being set up in South America. And it was massive amounts of money that was given on a promise of things changing very quickly. Now, fast forward 3-4 years, and that really just hasn't happened. You've seen in Canada, there's massive oversupply, and the formation of a really large global supply chain has just happened much, much slower than everybody thought. And, people invested in cannabis almost wanting 3-4 year returns, when in actual fact, you've got to look at it as a pharmaceutical investment horizon. The time it takes to get into market and actually get a return on what's been put in is what you need to look at it, is how you need to look at it rather, But the problem is you've got a lot of investors that are disillusioned because they put money in based on these big promises of massive returns and massive profits in a very short space of time, and it just hasn't materialized. And I think if you look at the valuations of the listed Canadian companies, the one called Cannabis Growth, one of the biggest companies in the world, its value's come down almost 95% since 2017. At one point they had a $6 billion market cap, and it's come down massively purely because there's no real route to profit. It was built with the thinking that it was going to be very easy to access markets and they're going to grow, and it just hasn't happened. So very often, not by any fault of the operators or the management teams, but just by virtue of the fact that the markets haven't grown as quickly as they were supposed to, you've got a very large capital base globally that's completely tired of stories and is sitting on the sidelines until they can see companies in the cannabis industry that actually prove that they can generate profit rather than taking investor dollars time and time again.
I think that's quite interesting that you mentioned that. I mean, how then should these companies or new entrants think about generating profit? I'm thinking about the consumer demand. Just looking at Africa alone, is there demand for these products locally, or are you seeing more institutionalized demand from maybe medicinal use in terms of developing the medical field, where we're using certain elements of the plant in like medicines, pills, and the like? Where is the demand coming from? Are people consuming this, or is it more on a larger scale institutional base? And how does this contribute to the whole profit equation?
So it really is, it's people consuming it, and it's a strictly medical market where the opportunity lies right now. The difference really, I think, is that you've got to build companies that are right-sized to the size of the market, which was the mistake that was made. And I use Canada as an example again. We built for massive demand that just hasn't happened, not because the demand doesn't exist, but because it doesn't exist legally. And I think the best way to do it is to really get a good grip on the size of the market and the real opportunity, and build your business in terms of that, and capitalize the business in terms of that, and make sure that you've got the right cost base to last longer, and last for the amount of time it takes to really get into market. You've got to have 2 to 3 years of cash really to build and get certified, and that's if it's all done quickly, if your target is somewhere like Germany, for example. So unless the plan is to sort of focus on brands and build craft quality product that is for a much smaller scale, which is a great model, but you just don't have many markets to access. But if you want to go into the medical, pharmaceutical-based space, you're dealing with a different type of investor, and that's where we've got to target investors that understand that if you want to pursue clinical trials, for example, that's a 10 to 12 year investment horizon, and it's massively expensive, but that's how much these things cost. And if that's the direction you're going to take, then at least everybody on board is understanding of, you've managed expectations, I think. And I think that's, I guess, the key problem, is that expectations on a global level have not been managed. And because of that, all the new entrants into the space are subject to much more scrutiny. Business plans are questioned much more heavily than they were not more than 3, 4, 5 years ago. And I think investors just want to see execution at this point. And that's what what you've got to strive for, I think, if you were to start a business from ground zero now.
So just to see if I understand you correctly, you're saying that slow legal progress is slowing profit and investment returns. Is that where we're at? So we need to start moving on legalizing the sector and making it more legally suited for growth.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I think the underlying factor to that is that a lot of building and businesses were set up on the assumption that legalization was going to move a lot quicker. So people are just running out of time, and it's just not moving fast enough. And there's some really, really good businesses and really good operations and companies that just haven't been able to get the access to the market because the promises made in terms of rules changing and regulations being put in place just haven't come to pass.
So just speaking about the massive opportunities, M&G Health became one of the first to obtain a license to trade medical cannabis with the European Union, the first export partner, I think, being Germany. What has that experience been like, and what can you extract from that for new entrants and what they need to prepare for in order to get these licenses and accreditations to work in that export market?
Yeah, so the license I referred to there is what I mentioned earlier, that EU GMP, that the Good Manufacturer Certification. So it took us 3 years to get an auditor down from Germany to actually come and audit the sites. After that, you've got to wait for them to give you feedback and you've got to make some adjustments. It's another 3 to 6 months before you can actually enter the market. So I think the message is it's going to take a whole lot longer than anybody ever thought, and it's going to cost a whole lot more than anyone ever thought if you want to target those markets.
And just speaking on the jobs aspect of it, I think this is always going to be topical and interesting in terms of economic growth. The sector has been spoken about as providing the next tranche of jobs and boost for the economy, but I am interested in understanding the quality of job creation the sector can offer. We've seen with the agricultural sector that it tends to often provide seasonal jobs that might provide benefit for maybe 2 quarters of the year, but not necessarily stable throughout. What is the sense on the job creation aspect and the potential for this industry for Africa specifically?
So I think that it's one of the reasons why cannabis is such an exciting industry is because it covers such a wide spectrum of skills. Because as you say, you've got agriculture and there will be an element of the agriculture that's seasonal. If you've got people that are growing cannabis outdoors, 1 harvest, maybe 2 harvests a year, and that's going into bulk biomass. But you can go from that all the way to people that are developing pharmaceutical drugs. And even on the agriculture side, if you're doing more of a consistent harvest cycle, you're controlling the light and you're harvesting more regularly, it's a crop that requires serious amounts of attention. So it's not something that it's not in your interest to mechanize it and automate it. It really needs a lot of human touch. So it's got long-term potential for large employment on the agricultural side. And then on the pharmaceutical and medical side, you require very high-skilled labor. If I use us as an example, we're currently one of the biggest employers of BSc in engineering graduates in Lesotho because it's a pharmaceutical factory and it requires very, very skilled and very, very smart people. And for us, it's been quite special, actually, because a lot of those type of people in Lesotho that come through the university with master's degrees and engineering degrees have had very little opportunities to stay in Lesotho and work. And the country's often lost those people to South Africa or abroad. So an industry that promises to, on one hand, employ large volumes of people and at the same time provide an outlet for very high-skilled people and highly educated people is something that I think is really quite special, to be honest.
And that right there is Luke van der Nest of MG Health speaking about the state of the cannabis industry on the continent and telling us really that legal progression is going to be very important for the industry's growth in future and for investors who are looking to make huge returns on betting on the industry. Thank you once again for joining us on the pod, Luke.
Thank you, Akona. That was great.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and follow Small Business Conversations and don't forget to share our episodes. If you want to contribute to the conversation, you can tweet me at machoba_a or you can email us at smepodcast@moneyweb.co.za to share your thoughts and suggestions for future conversations. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.
You've been listening to Small Business Conversations with Akona Machoba. To listen to more Moneyweb podcasts, go to moneyweb.co.za, the Moneyweb app, or your favorite podcast platforms. Moneyweb, your trusted source for business and investment insights.